But remember, you still can do your one walk a day, which is so important for our mental and physical health. Just getting out, enjoying the spaces that you might have around your homes, and really reconnecting with the natural world around us. Okay, cool. So as I say, my name is Elliot, and I'm absolutely passionate about the natural world, and also telling people about the natural world. One thing, I'm not a presenter. What I am is a Biodiversity Officer for Kingston Council, which is a borough in London, which I think is one of the best jobs in the world. And what my job basically is trying to make my home borough, the borough in which I was born, better for wildlife and better for the communities that live around it too, because the more biodiversity, more healthy our environments are, the better it is for wildlife. And hopefully over the next 20 minutes or so, I will convince you that you can find some amazing natural species within our urban environments across the world, and particularly London, because that's where I am at the moment. So the first thing I want you guys to do, or while you're watching this, is sort of think, when I say the word nature, what sort of words spring to mind? What sort of images conjure in your brain? When I was probably a child, I used to think of the word nature. I would think of Africa. I'd think of like a leopard looking over a savannah with like wildebeest and zebras all over the place. And then as I grow up, I started to think, oh, maybe our countryside. So in the UK, we've got 15 national parks. So maybe some of the wildlife that we found out there. But as I was growing up and exploring London's wilder spaces, I've come to decide, when I think of the word nature now, I think of London, which might be quite a strange sort of thing for some people to think of. But bear with me. Hopefully, by the end of this little session, I've convinced you that you can find some really amazing species within our capital. Okay, so this is a map of London. Hopefully you can see that to the screen. And one thing that I want you to gauge from that map is how green our city is. So when you take all 33 boroughs into account, London is about 49.5% green and blue space, which is absolutely incredible. We have about 8 million trees in London, which makes it like an urban forest. And there are so many species here. So in across London, Giggle, who are data record holders for London, have recorded nearly 16,000 species in the capital, which is absolutely incredible. That's probably more species than some of our national parks that you find out in the countryside. And that is not including our zoos, I promise. But just to give you an example, so in London we have the Thames, which is a river that's 215 miles long. I'm sure you've all heard of it, but it flows through the heart of London. And that is an absolutely essential wildlife corridor. It's really, London wouldn't be here if the Thames wasn't here. And it is home to some amazing species. And the tidal elements alone, we've got about 125 species of fish just recorded in that bit, which is absolutely amazing considering in 1950s, the Thames was declared an ecologically wasteland. It was declared ecologically dead, which is a real sort of transformation we've seen over the sort of the last sort of century or 50 years or so. And some of the species you can find in the Thames, you can find the fish like European eels, which are critically endangered. You can also find things like porpoises and dolphins, which occasionally come into the river. Things like seals, which I've seen relatively regularly when you know where to look at it across London. And also, surprisingly, there have been reports of populations of seahorses that live in the Thames in the heart of London, just outside the Globe Theatre. So the river itself is an absolutely amazing, important wildlife source for the capital, really. And if you look from the rivers, if you look up into the skies, there's also some amazing wildlife that can be seen there. So the London Bird Atlas, and last year recorded about 188 different bird species that you can find in the capital, which is a pretty decent number, I'm sure you agree. And they can include like really rare birds, for example, the black redstarts, which have been recorded to breed within London. And also last year, following the amazing reintroduction of white-tailed seagulls to the Isle of Wight, we saw yeah, some of these white-tailed sea eagles fly over London, which was absolutely incredible. So over the Houses of Parliament, people looked up and saw a barn door of a bird, which is a white-tailed sea eagle. So there really are some incredible species in the capital. And one thing that I want to do is try and raise awareness of all these amazing animals. And one thing, I think, one way in which people typically try and learn about wildlife, or if they're out on holiday, say they go to Africa or something, you might go on safari. So I think London has enough species, enough amazing natural history and biodiversity to merit its own sort of wildlife safaris that we can sort of do ourselves. And if you ever go on safari, you might be lucky enough to go on look for the big five. And I think London, because of all the species that it has, could potentially have its own its own big five. So these are some of the candidates that I'm going to put to you. This is my first one. Okay, so I imagine some of you might have seen these birds before. I'll show you a bit closer to the screen. There you go. So that some of you might have seen it, as I say, is a peregrine falcon, or a peregrine really. The falcon is just the female. And these are the world's fastest creatures that have ever lived on our planet. They're amazingly adapted aerial hunters. They're aerial predators. And what they do, they fly up really, really high into the sky, into the like little sort of specks that you can barely see. And they dive down in what we call the stoop. And what they're looking for are things like pigeons. Okay. And imagine if you're falling out of the air with speeds that can be in excess of 200 miles an hour. You have loads of wind in your face. It would be hard to see the sort of pigeons that you're aiming for. So they have a special ecological evolutionary adaptation, which is called a nictitating membrane, which is basically a third eyelid that creeps across their eyes, and it's see-through, and it means they can sort of keep their eyes open while they're going at these incredible speeds to look for the pigeons or sort of prey species that they're after. And if you went back around 50 years or so, maybe a bit more, in the 60s, say, peregrines were on the brinks of extinction. It was really, really touch and go with these birds. But now they're really starting to come back. And in London alone, we've got about 30, potentially more than 30 breeding pairs of peregrines, which it's a really good sort of conservation success story. And our cities are amazing places for things like peregrines, because if you look at the world through a peregrine's eyes, it's very well suited to where they're sort of evolved from. So we think peregrines are very well adapted to live on our coasts. So we've got big cliffs and lots of rock doves. And if you look at a city, all our big tall towers are effectively cliffs, and all the pigeons that we have are really important prey species. So there's the rock doves are the ones you sort of find, well, lots of sort of birds around the coast, and feral pigeons are a really good prey species for them. So really good bird. And then down on the links, if you can see below, I'll answer some of your questions a little bit because I'm struggling to sort of see them. I've actually got my amazing girlfriend who's just here, who will be reading out questions because I can't really see. And Laura studies zoology too, so I'm sure she can help answer some of the questions at the end. But as I say, peregrines, if you look into our little link below, you'll find a link to a live feed to peregrines that are currently nesting on a roof in Kingston at the moment. So there's a falcon there sitting on 3 eggs. So after this, check that out. Really, really cool thing. My next candidate for our big five is this guy. I'm sure many of you might have seen one of these before. And this is one of the biggest beetles we have in the UK. It is called a stag beetle. Okay, stag beetles, again, absolutely amazing creatures. And they say southwest London is one of the best places in the world to sort of see these stag beetles. But these, like all things in nature, the more you learn, the more amazing these creatures become. And these creatures have an incredible life cycle. So they spend most of their lives in dead wood. And we call species that rely on dead wood called saprophilic communities. So these form part of the saprophilic communities, all the beetles and stuff that depend on dead wood. So dead wood is actually a really important thing. And these creatures, as a larvae will bury into the dead wood. They'll be in dead wood that's typically underground, and they'll be munching away at the dead wood, increasing the sort of size of the larva, improving its fat stores. And it can do that from about 3 up to 7 years. So it can be underground for potentially 7 years, which is absolutely astonishing. Every time I think about that, it's just mad. Imagine being encased in dead rotting wood for 7 years. Not a life I would choose to lead. But anyway, these then come out in sort of a summer's day, and they'll emerge only for about 4 weeks, something like that. And when they come out, they are typically only looking to mate. So that's their plan. They're trying to reproduce and get a female to lay their eggs, to lay their offspring. And you see, the reason they're called stag beetles is because the males have these amazing antler-like structures. And what they use these antler-like structures for is to sort of combat other males. And what they do, they'll stand on the log or something, and they'll try and push the other male off the log. And the one that stays remaining on the log is the one that typically will get to mate with a female. But these amazing sort of structures here are actually remnants of the jaw. So it sacrificed its jaw to create these antler structures. And that means when people see these beetles, they're sometimes a little bit scared of them. They might bite them. You might think they might bite you. But actually, the males haven't even got a mouth to bite you with. They can't eat. They can only sort of drink a little bit. So that is why they can only live for a very short amount of time once they've come out of the larval stage. And yes, they pose no threat to us. So if you see one, it's an absolute marvel. So please don't try and squash them if you see them. One thing you can do in all your gardens is actually put dead wood out. And at the back of my garden, you probably can't see it. We've actually got a stag beetle loggery, which is just wood put in the ground, trying to make good habitat for these guys and all the other sort of saprophytic creatures that depend on dead wood. So hopefully some of you have seen that. Is there any questions? Well, I have questions at the end, shall we? Or what's a question there? We'll do questions at the end. Oh, there'll be plenty of time. The next candidate for my big five is this guy. I'm sure some of you might have seen some of these before. It is one of the cutest animals, I think, that we have on the British Isles. But unfortunately, it has one of the saddest titles. So these water voles are the most declining mammals, or declining wild mammals that we have in the UK. So they're unfortunately plummeting. We've lost about 94% of our water voles. So it's really, really sad. But we still have populations of water vole across the capital and some of our rivers, which is a really positive thing to see. And these are actually really adaptable creatures. So they're herbivores, which means they eat plants and vegetation matters most of the time. And they've actually got quite adaptable diets. They can eat about 227 different types of reed and plant. So they can survive pretty well in most rivers because they can eat lots of different sort of vegetation type things. But the most important thing about these creatures, I think personally, is sort of where they fit in the food system. So we've got sort of 4 species of vole in the UK, if you include the Orkney vole. Obviously, we don't find the Orkney vole in London, but we do find the other 3 voles. And this is our largest of all those 4 voles. So the water vole is probably about a third bigger than the next biggest vole. And that means it's a really good meal for a lot of different things, like a heron or other sort of riverine predators that you might find in our river systems. So a really good thing to sort of support the base of the food web. So by having these in the river, it means we can have lots of more sort of complex and robust sort of food webs supporting predators and all other sort of mesopredators and stuff like that. So really important creatures that we have on our rivers. And just to say just quickly, on our local river here, which is called the Hogsmill, we unfortunately, on the last water vole was spotted in about 2014, so we think they're functionally extinct on our local river here. We're actually working with an organisation called Citizen Zoo, and they are leading a community-led project to try and bring water voles back to our catchment, which would be amazing to see. And the best thing about water voles, if you've got them in your catchment, you might not see them because they're eaten by so many things. They're quite scared creatures. So what they'll do, they sit on the bank, eating their sort of nibbling away at all sorts of sedges and stuff. But they're always on the lookout. So they've got these eyes at the side of their head, looking out for different creatures that might be trying to eat them. And if they see something that's a bit scary that they think might eat them, they'll jump into the river and make the biggest splash possible, what we call a plop. And that plop is not only it trying to get away from potential predators, it's also warning all the other water voles that might be in the local area to sort of say, watch out, I'm about to get eaten, you jump in the river too to try and escape too. So if you hear one plop, you might then hear a whole series of plops, which I think is a real good sound of ecological health. If you walk down the river and hear these plops, might be lucky enough to be water voles. Cool. All right. We're now on to my next one, which is a kingfisher. A kingfisher is probably the most beautiful bird I think we have in the UK. So we do have them again on, they're really well adapted to sort of London rivers. They bury in the banks. That's where they have their nests. And things that I think make kingfishers so special is just their coloration. So they have these electric blue feathers. And actually, if you looked at one individual feather of a kingfisher, it's actually transparent. So this amazing blue colour comes from how the light travels through each of the feathers and how the feathers interlock. It's what we call structural colour. It's very difficult for many animals to make the blue pigment, but what the pigment they can make, and this is something I really like about kingfishers, because I feel like I can relate to them. So they have these beautiful orange breasts made from a pigment called carotenoids, and the brighter the orange, the more attractive they are to females. So hopefully, as a nice ginger person, and hopefully Laura, my girlfriend, can attest to, the more ginger they are, the more attractive they are to females. But again, beautiful birds. They have to eat their weight in fish every single day, pretty much. And so that means if you've got them in your river, it means you've got lots of good fish in there, which means you've got a pretty good, robust, healthy ecosystem. Cool.
Before you move on to the next one, Elliot, we've got a question referring to the water voles. Could you tell us what functionally extinct means and how it's different from actually extinct?
Okay, cool. All right. So really good question. So extinct, if a species is extinct in the wild, that means there's no more sort of living on the planet, or in the wild at least. But if it's functionally extinct, so on our river, it means we haven't got enough water voles to sustain a population. We're not seeing them regularly enough. So we think there's a local extinction event, but there's not enough water voles there to sustain population. So there's not enough ones to breed and mate. So it just means we don't have a healthy population of water voles here, which can be sustainable into the long term. So that is a real shame, and we're sort of seeing these extinction events happen around the UK with water voles. But fortunately, there's lots of things we can do to try and reverse that and bring them back into our landscapes, which I think is an incredibly successful thing. But that's a really good question, and hopefully that gives you an idea of what functionally extinct means. As I'm drawing this to sort of close, I thought I'd choose an animal that draws our days to a close, and these are obviously our bats. So our bats, I think, are some of the most fascinating mammals that we have in the UK. So across the UK, we've got about 17 species of breeding bats, and across London, 11 of those have been recorded. So we've got quite a lot of bats in London, which I think is amazing. Oh, this is upside down, actually. And this is my favourite bat species, okay? And this is what we call the Dorbenton bat. And these bats are specially evolved to live along our water courses. So if you can see, the bat has this amazing back foot. And the back foot just sits, they cast it out basically like sort of fishing nets. And as they fly along the tops of the water, they leave their big nets out, and they sort of pick up all insects, and they feed on the wing, because all our bats in the UK are insectivores, meaning they all eat insects. So these bats can probably eat up to maybe 3,000 bugs in one night, which is an astonishing amount of insects. And I could talk about bats all day, so I won't. But one thing I love about bats is that they evolved a long time ago. So on the mammal tree, they diverted away, and they actually can live a long, long time for a mammal of that size. So the longest bat recording, I think it's like a Brandt's bat, which lived 42 years, which I think is something, a mammal of that size living for that amount of time, absolutely amazing. Of course, lots and lots of stuff that we can learn. That brings me to the end of my big five, and hopefully out of that you've realised that there's a whole ton of nature that we have in our cityscapes, in our gardens, and now it's more than ever important that we sort of appreciate these green spaces and the value they have to our health of our communities. So please do, even someone like me who absolutely lives for nature, over the last sort of week or so, I've been hearing more the bird songs even sounded louder to me. So I think in this difficult time, let's really use nature as a way to sort of improve our health as much as we can, and just appreciate the natural world that's around us. But we've still got, I think, a minute for some questions.
Okay, there's quite a lot of questions.
Oh, wow.
Okay, referring back to the River Thames and how many species we've got compared to when it was extinct.
Cool.
Have the species on the Thames had to adapt to pollution in the water?
Oh, it's a really good question. So the River Thames is quite a polluted river, but for most river systems in the UK, it's actually one of our cleaner, or in cities, around the world, it's one of the cleaner sort of urban rivers that we have. There's been lots of work done to stop reducing the amount of sewage going in, but it is still a problem. And that is an issue for lots of different species. There are some invertebrate species that really depend on clean water. There's actually a really good system across the UK, which is called the river monitoring system. And that's where you jump in rivers with nets and you look at the abundance of invertebrates and the amount of different species there are. And the more species and invertebrate, the more there is, we use that to see how cleaner the water is. So the water the pollution of rivers really is important.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. Question from Billy, age 12.
Oh, hello,
What is
Billy.
your favourite animal to see in London?
Oh, see, my favourite animal probably changes every single day, I think. But now we're starting to see our bats come out of hibernation. So I went on my one day yesterday. I went on a run in the evening, and I started seeing bats circling above my head, and it was just so nice to see that. So I think at the moment it's bats, and probably the Dorbenton bat is my favourite one.
Okay, from Lucas, 10. What is your favourite area of London to see wildlife?
Oh, see, I'm biased. So I live in Kingston. So we have we've got 10 nature reserves in Kingston. And I like going to the little nature reserves that people don't always sort of know about. So I love Richmond Park because it's a great space, but I like to go some of the more quieter spaces. And my favourite nature reserve is actually one we made a film about, which is on the link to this. It's called the Peregrine Nature Reserve, and we restored it about 2 years ago. So have a look at that link, and that shows you my favourite nature reserve.
Okay, Sharkman Dan went to see the beluga whale that was in the Thames a while ago. Is there enough food for a whale like that to feed on for a while, or are they always doomed to get lost?
I'm not a great expert on cetaceans, I must admit, but I think mostly when that beluga came in, it was quite a stressed animal. I think it was a bit lost. It didn't really have the food that it really needed. But things like porpoises and the odd dolphin, it can definitely support. Porpoises are smallest cetacean that we have, and it can definitely support those. But when you get to sort of the bigger cetaceans, I think we're going to struggle. And also all the noise pollution from all the boats, that can sort of scare them too.
I think that's the biggest thing, isn't it? They get lost and they get very, very confused by all the sound because they navigate via sound. And with all the other sounds, it's difficult. Okay, what's the most unexpected, unusual species you've seen or found in London?
A really good question. Well, I think last year when I heard that there were white-tailed sea eagles flying above London, I think that's going to surprise anyone.
Yeah, good answer.
Cool. All right. How are we doing for time?
We can keep going.
Okay.
What are your top tips for families living away from green spaces in cities?
Living away from green spaces.
Really good question.
So nature can be found absolutely anywhere. So as I say, the Peregrine Falcons that we have at the moment are on the top of a Kingston College building. So even on our sort of more built environments, we can find some really amazing species. So if you don't have much green spaces around you, you still can walk around. And in this time of sort of social distancing, or watch out while you're walking, make sure you stay away from people, but always look up. There'll always be interesting things happening, especially now. We've started seeing our summer sort of migrants coming in. So you might start seeing things like swifts come in, which are amazing. And they are really good to see if you look up. They're sort of circling and singing above us. So swifts are a really cool thing to see. And you can see them anyway. You don't need green spaces to sort of see swifts. But yeah, I'm sure the way London is, there'll always be a little bit of green space somewhere. So you just try to hunt it down and see where it is and try and explore it. I'm sure you'll be pleasantly surprised.
We've already had extinct. Great talk, really enjoyed. Are there any initiatives you tried in Kingston that have worked really well and could be tried in other urban areas across the UK?
Oh, okay. Well, I fundamentally believe in community-led conservation, and that's where I think anybody can be a conservationist from the grassroots level. So I really want to try and empower people to get them up and excited about wildlife and try and do as much sort of conservation as they can do in their local area. And that's where I think we really are going to solve sort of global problems like that. And one thing that I sort of mentioned in the talk, we're currently helping to run a water vole reintroduction project. And this is led pretty much entirely by the local community. So we've trained 60 volunteers in Kingston to go out and look along our river, and they're looking at different types of habitat types that you can find that a water vole likes to live in. And they've mapped the entire length of our catchment. And now we're looking to hopefully reintroduce those water voles in the next year. But we wouldn't be able to do any of that surveying unless we've got the community involved to do it. So I think, anything involving the community and local people is how I would do any sort of conservation projects. Cool.
That's awesome. I think that's the end of
Is that good for time? All right. Well, thank you for listening, guys. And make sure there's 2 more awesome talks coming to you later today and loads more to come in the following weeks. So stay safe. And what a time to listen to the bird song and enjoy our green spaces. Bye for now. End.